Of course, as 4 more states, Florida, Arizona, Ohio, and Illinois, prepare to vote on Tuesday, with Vice President Biden currently leading Senator Sanders in the race for delegates. Here's what we're going to do tonight. Each of you will have 90 seconds to answer questions and 45 seconds for responses and rebuttals. As much as we can, we hope this will be a conversation between the two of you. So let's begin with the most important issue right now, the coronavirus, and what you would do as president in the face of it. Vice President Biden, let me start with you. We're in a reality right now that might have seemed unimaginable a week ago. Schools have been canceled for more than 25 million students. Grocery store shelves have been cleared out. March Madness, NBA games, Disney parks, Broadway, small businesses all shut down. And just today, the CDC issued a new recommendation that for the next 8 weeks, events that consist of 50 people or more throughout the U.S. be canceled or postponed. What do you say to the American people who are confronting this new reality?
First of all, my heart goes out to those who have already lost someone or those who are suffering from the virus. And this is bigger than any one of us. This calls for a national rallying to everybody move together. And, I laid out in detail what I would do if were I president today. You can go to joebiden.com and I laid it out in significant detail. But there are 3 pieces of this. First of all, I have to take care of those who in fact are exposed or likely to be exposed to the virus. And that means we have to do testing. We have to get the testing kits up and ready. I would have the World Health Organization. I'd take advantage of the test kits they have available to us. Even though the president says 1 million or more are coming, let's just get all the tests we can done as quickly as we can. Secondly, I would make sure that every state in the union had at least 10 places where they had drive-through testing arrangements. I would also, at this point, deal with the need to begin to plan for the need for additional hospital beds. We have that capacity in the Department of Defense, as well as with the FEMA, and they can set up 100-bed, 500-bed hospitals in tents quickly. We have to lay all that out, but we have to deal with the economic fallout quickly. And that means making sure the people who, in fact, lose their job, don't get a paycheck, can't pay their mortgage, are able to pay it and pay them now and do it now. Small businesses be able to borrow interest-free loans. I see my time is up here. You're going to hold us tightly, I assume. But that's what I would do. Go to joebiden.com. It lays out precisely what I would do were I president today.
Senator Sanders, this morning, Dr. Anthony Fauci acknowledged that it's possible that hundreds of thousands, if not millions of Americans, could die from the coronavirus in a worst-case scenario. If you were president right now, what's the most important thing you would do tonight to try to save American lives?
Well, first thing we have got to do, whether or not I'm president, is to shut this president up right now, because he is undermining the doctors and the scientists who are trying to help the American people. It is unacceptable for him to be blabbering with unfactual information, which is confusing the general public. Second of all, what we need to do, and I'm glad that he has called a state of national emergency, what we have got to do is move aggressively to make sure that every person in this country finally understands that when they get sick with the coronavirus, that all payments will be made, that they don't have to worry about coming up with money for testing. They don't have to worry about coming up with money for treatment. This is an unprecedented moment in American history. Now, I obviously believe in Medicare for all. I will fight for that as president. But right now, in this emergency, I want every person in this country to understand that when you get sick, you go to the doctor. When you get sick, if you have the virus, that will be paid for. Do not worry about the costs right now, because we're in the middle of a national emergency. Second of all, we have to make sure that our hospitals have the ventilators that they need, have the IC units that they need. Right now, we have a lack of medical personnel, and I worry very much that if there is a peak, whether we have the capability of dealing with the hundreds of thousands of people who may be in hospitals. So we need unprecedented action right now to deal with the unprecedented crisis. And bottom line, from an economic point of view, what we have got to say to the American people, if you lose your job, you will be made whole. You're not going to lose income. If Trump can put, or the Fed can put $1.5 trillion into the banking system, we can protect the wages of every worker in America.
Thank you, Senator. Vice President Biden, President Trump says he does not take any responsibility for the problems with coronavirus testing, in part because he says he inherited so many rules, regulations, and red tape. Did bureaucratic red tape hamper this response in any way?
No, look, the World Health Organization offered the testing kits that they have available and to give it to us now. We refused it. We did not want to buy them. We did not want to get them from them. We wanted to make sure we had our own. I think he said something like, we have the best scientists in America, or something to that effect. The idea that we are not prepared for this and the other thing I want to point out, and I agree with Bernie, we're in a situation where we have to now be providing for the hospitals that are going to be needed now. The present system cannot handle the surge that is likely to come. So we should already be sitting down and planning where we're going to put these temporary hospitals. And we can do that. We did that. We've been through this before with the coronavirus. We've been through this before, we've been through this before with dealing with the viruses that the N1H15, as well as what happened in Africa. We provided these hospitals dealing with these great pandemics, and we were able to do it quickly, and people would have a place to go. But we also have to provide the equipment to protect the first responders, and that's not being done either.
Senator Sanders, on that note, and you both of you have addressed this, but obviously another major health concern right now for officials is the potential surge in patients all at once, overburdening hospitals, the healthcare system. You've mentioned ICU beds, both of you, and ventilators. We're already in the middle of flu season, so already a lot of those beds and ventilators are already being used. If you were president right now, what would you do to make sure every sick American is able to get treatment so the U.S. does not suffer the same fate as Italy, where doctors have to decide right now who gets life-saving treatment and who does not?
Jake, let's be honest and understand that this coronavirus pandemic exposes the incredible weakness and dysfunctionality of our current healthcare system. Now, we're spending twice as much per person on healthcare as the people of any other country. How in God's name does it happen that we end up with 87 million people who are uninsured or underinsured, and there are people who are watching this program tonight who say, I'm not feeling well. Should I go to the doctor, but I can't afford to go to the doctor? What happens if I am sick? It's going to cost thousands of dollars for treatment. Who's going to feed my kids? We are the only major country on earth not to guarantee health care to all people. We're spending so much money, and yet we are not even prepared for this pandemic. How come we don't have enough doctors? How come hospitals in rural areas are shutting down? How come people can't afford to get the prescription drugs they need because we have a bunch of crooks who are running the pharmaceutical industry, ripping us off every single day? And I'll tell you something right now. In the midst of this epidemic, you got people in the pharmaceutical industry are saying, oh, wow, what an opportunity to make a fortune. So the word has got to go out, and I certainly would do this as president. You don't worry, people of America, do not worry about the cost of prescription drugs. Do not worry about the cost of the health care that you're going to get, because we are a nation, a civilized, democratic society. Everybody, rich and poor, middle class, will get the care they need. The drug companies will not rip us off.
Thank you, Senator. Vice President Biden, some medical experts are saying the only true way to control this virus is through a national quarantine, requiring every American other than essential personnel to stay home. Would you take that unprecedented step of a national lockdown?
What I would do is what we did in our administration. I would call a meeting in the Situation Room of all the experts in America dealing with this crisis. I would sit them down and I would do exactly what we did then. What is it that we need? Listen to the experts. What do we need? And with all due respect to Medicare for All, you have a single-payer system in Italy. It doesn't work there. It has nothing to do with Medicare for All. That would not solve the problem at all. We can take care of that right now by making sure that no one has to pay for treatment, period, because of the crisis. No one has to pay for whatever drugs are needed, period, because of the crisis. No one has to pay for hospitalization because of the crisis, period. That is a national emergency, and that's how it's handled. It is not working in Italy right now, and they have a single-payer system. Now, with regard to what else I would do, the fact is that we're in a position where I would bring together the leading experts in the world. Instead of doing this in the United States, instead of doing this piecemeal, sit down and do what we did before with the Ebola crisis. What is needed? And have one voice, like we did every day we met in that crisis in the Situation Room, laying out, so we lay out overall for all the nation what the best proposal is and how to move forward. In the absence of that, governors are making some sound decisions. They're doing the best they can by going out and getting the healthcare experts in their communities and their states to move. But it should be directed from the White House, from the Situation Room, laying out in detail like we did in the Ebola crisis, and we beat it.
Thank you. Senator Sanders, your response?
Well, first of all, the dysfunctionality of the current healthcare system is obviously apparent. As I said earlier, there are people who hesitate to go to the doctor. You're going to have a maze of regulations. Well, if this is my income, if that's my income, can I get it? Can I not get it? Clearly, we are not prepared, and Trump only exacerbates the crisis. When we spend twice as much per capita on healthcare as any other nation, one might expect that we would have enough doctors all over this country. One might expect that we would have affordable prescription drugs. One might expect that we are preparing effectively for a pandemic, that we were ready with the ventilators, with the ICUs, with the test kits that we need. We are not. And bottom line here is, in terms of Medicare for all, despite what the vice president is saying, what the experts tell us is that one of the reasons that we are unprepared and have been unprepared is we don't have a system. We got thousands of private insurance plans. That is not a system that is prepared to provide health care to all people. In a good year, without the epidemic, we're losing up to 60,000 people who die every year because they don't get to a doctor on time. And clearly this crisis is only making a bad situation worse.
That has nothing to do when you're in a national crisis. The national crisis says we're responding. It's all free. You don't have to pay for a thing. That has nothing to do with whether or not you have an insurance policy. This is a crisis. We're at war with the virus. We're at war with the virus. It has nothing to do with co-pays or anything. We just passed a law saying that you do not have to pay for any of this, period.
That's not true. As a matter of fact, that's not true. That law has enormous loopholes. I understand that Nancy Pelosi did her best. Republicans prevented it.
No,
what you're talking about, Joe, here is enormous loopholes within that in fact it is not necessarily covering treatment for all people in America, and that people are going to be stuck with a bill unless we change that. And we're going to offer legislation to in fact change that.
If I may, I offered legislation. I laid out on my plan that it would cover exactly what is not covered by the House. I laid out in the plan that I laid out for how we would deal with this crisis. Nobody will pay for anything having to do with the crisis. This is a national emergency. There isn't a question of whether or not this is something that can be covered by insurance or anything else. We, out of the Treasury, are going to pay for this. It's a national emergency.
But you see,
that's what my plan calls for.
But the weakness of this is, let's just do a hypothetical. Family members diagnosed with the virus. Terrible tragedy, massive anxiety. The wife has the virus, the husband is a wreck, wants to go to a psychologist, wants to get counseling, doesn't have the money to do that. Maybe their kid breaks a leg, they don't have the money to go to health care. So you're saying right now in the middle of a crisis, but you know what? Last year, at least 30,000 people died in America because they didn't get health care when they should, because we don't have universal coverage. I think that's a crisis. 1 out of 5 people in America cannot afford the prescription drugs they need. They suffer. Some die. I consider that a crisis. Bottom line is, we need a simple system which exists in Canada, exists in countries all over the world. And that is, if you are an American, you get the health care you need. End of discussion. We can save huge sums of money doing that. The trick is, do we have the guts to take on the healthcare industry, some of which is funding the vice president's campaign? Do we have the courage to take on the executives at the prescription drug industry, some of whom are funding his campaign?
Look, this is a national crisis. I don't want to get this into a back and forth in terms of our politics here. I've laid out a plan, building on Obamacare, providing a public option of Medicare that would cover everyone the same way. This idea that this is his only answer is a mistaken notion. But regardless of whether my plan was in place or his, this is a crisis. This is like we are being attacked from abroad. This is something that is of great consequence. This is like a war. And in a war, you do whatever is needed to be done to take care of your people. And what you do is and I proposed it and laid it out in detail. everything that you need in terms of dealing with this crisis would be free. It is paid for by the taxpayers generally. Generally. It has nothing to do with Bernie's Medicare for all. And by the way,
Vice President Biden, thank you. If I may, the Vice President just mentioned war. Would you deploy the U.S. military in effort to contain the virus? And if so, how?
Well, I think we use all of the tools that make sense. And using the National Guard, which is, folks, I think in New York State are already using the National Guard, that is something that has to be done. This is clearly, as the Vice President indicated, a national emergency. And what I worry about is not only how we respond aggressively to the virus, but also how we respond aggressively to the economic fallout of a global recession. So right now in Illinois and Ohio, if my memory is correct, the governor there has said they're closing down bars, they're closing down restaurants. What happens to the workers who are there? What happens to the millions of workers who may end up losing their jobs? So what I think we have got to do right now is if Trump can provide, or the Fed can provide $1.5 trillion for liquidity for the banks, well, we've got to say to every worker in America, you know what? Don't panic. You'll be able to pay your mortgage, because you're going to get a check. You're going to be made
Senator, we're going to
whole.
talk about the economic impact. Go ahead, Mr. Vice President.
the answer is I would call out the military.
Okay.
Now, they have the capacity to provide this surge help that hospitals need and that is needed across the nation. I would make sure that they did exactly what they're prepared to do. They've done it. They did it in the Ebola crisis. They've done it. They have the capacity to build 500-bed hospitals and are in tents that are completely safe and secure and provide the help to get it done to anybody, this overflow. So it is a national emergency. I would call out the military.
Well, the Ebola crisis is one thing. This is obviously a pandemic, which is far more severe and impactful to this country. And I think one of the things that we want to remember here is that we got a lot of elderly people in this country who are told, stay home, don't leave your house. Who's going to get food to them? How do we get food to them? You got schools all over this country now being shut down. Okay? How are we going to make sure that the kids do well in this crisis, not become traumatized? What do we do about the parents now who have to stay home with the kids and can't go to work? So I think what bottom line here is that in this crisis, we have got to start paying attention to the most vulnerable. That includes people who are in prison right now, people who are in homeless shelters right now. What about the 500,000 people who are homeless tonight? Who's going to respond to them? Now, in 2008, when we had the Wall Street bailout, they did very well for the people on top. They bailed out the crooks on Wall Street. They forgot about the suffering of ordinary Americans. This time around, let us learn that lesson. Let us pay attention to the working families in this country and to the most vulnerable.
We have learned that lesson. And again, I lay out in detail. What we should be doing now is we should be surging help to those places which are the most vulnerable. We should have every single person that's in a nursing home being able to be tested. We should be moving forces in to do that. We should move in the capability in to do that. We should be sitting down, the president should be sitting down in the Situation Room right now and do what we did before and asking the question, okay, you're going to close everything. Well, if you close everything, how do you get prescriptions that have to be filled? How do you make sure when you close that school, those children are going to be able to get the school food program? How do you make sure that you're going to be able to see to it that you get your mortgage paid? I propose that all of that be covered, and it's going to take a multi-billion-dollar program to do that. But first things first. The first thing is take care of the immediate needs we have now relating to surging the kind of capability we have to prevent this great bump in terms of this, how it's going to cause such pain, as well as moving in the direction of making sure we have long-term plans.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. We're going to talk in a moment a lot more about the economic impact. But first, Senator Sanders, I want to ask about China. When this outbreak first started in China, the government there censored the whistleblower doctor who sounded the alarm and downplayed the true gravity of the virus.
Right.
What consequences should China face for its role in this global crisis?
Well, one of the consequences is we have got to learn that you cannot lie to the American people. You cannot be less than frank about the nature of the crisis. And what bothers me very much is you have a president of the United States today, Mr. Trump, who was praising China for the good work that they are doing, when in fact, as you indicated, they were lying to their own people and allowing that virus to move much more aggressively than should have been the case. Look, I don't think this is the time for reclamation, to be punishing people. Now is the time, by the way, to be working with China. They are learning a lot about this crisis. And in fact, we have got to work with them. We've got to work with the World Health Organization. We've got to work with Italy. We've got to work with countries around the world. If there was ever a moment when the entire world is in this together, got to support each other, this is that moment.
That's why, if I may respond, that's why I insisted the moment this broke out that we should insist on having our experts in China to see what was happening and make it clear to China there'd be consequences if we did not have that access. And we have to lead the world. We should be the ones doing what we did during the Ebola crisis, bringing the whole world together and saying, this is what we must do. We have to have a common plan. All nations are affected the same way by this virus, depending on exposure. And so we need world leadership. We need international leadership. We need someone who knows how to bring the world together and insist on fundamental change in the way in which we're approaching this.
Senator Sanders?
Well, the bottom line here is that in the midst of this crisis, we have got to act in an unprecedented way. And that means every country on earth is going to be affected. Every country on earth has got to work together. It also means that we tell the pharmaceutical industry, we tell the big money interests that this is not a time for profiteering. This is a time for all of us working together. The World Health Organization is a very, very strong organization. It is sad that we have a president that has ignored the international community in so many ways, including in terms of international health crises.
Thank you, Senator. Obviously, another part of this story is the economy, which is reeling from this pandemic. Many economists are warning of a recession. Just hours ago, the Federal Reserve cut interest rates to near 0%, which has not happened since the financial crisis in 2008. Vice President Biden, what would you do?
What I would do is make it clear to the world and make it clear to the United States that we are going to have a major, major, major bailout package, that we do not reward corporations, we reward individuals who in fact are really put to the test here. The problem is the policies of this administration economically we've eaten a lot of our seed corn. The ability for us to use levers that were available before have been used up by this god-awful tax cut of $1.9 trillion, by the fact that we have used, the Fed will be of little consequence now. They've already used what leverage they have. And so we're going to have to just level with the American people. And here's the deal. We're going to have to not only deal with the immediate crisis, economic crisis, which is the most critical now, to let people know their mortgages are going to be paid, their rents are going to be paid, they're going to have child care, they're going to make sure that all their medical bills are cared for relating to this, et cetera. We have to go beyond that. And we're going to have to be in a situation where we're meeting on a daily basis, like we did in the middle of a financial crisis, to decide how we are going to find the wherewithal and the money to be able to see to it we hold all these folks harmless, but not do what Trump wants to do. For example, he came along and said, I got a great idea.
Senator Sanders.
The Ebola crisis, in my view, exposes the dysfunctionality of our healthcare system and how poorly prepared we are despite how much money that we spend. And the Ebola crisis is also, I think, exposing the cruelty and the unjustness of our economy today. We have more income and wealth inequality in America today than any time in 100 years. And what that means that in the midst of this crisis, if you're a multimillionaire, no one's happy about this crisis. You're going to get through it. You're going to get everything you need. You're not worried about health care. You're not worried about income coming in. Half of our people are living paycheck to paycheck. We got people who are struggling, working 2 or 3 jobs to put food on the table. What is going to happen to them? So the lesson to be learned is we have got to move aggressively right now to address the economic crisis as a result of Ebola. Keep talking about Ebola. You got Ebola in my head here right now. as a result of the virus here, the coronavirus. What we have got to do also is understand the fragility of the economy and how unjust and unfair it is that so few have so much and so many have so little.
People are looking for results, not a revolution. They want to deal with the results they need right now. And we can do that by making sure that we make everybody whole who has been so badly hurt. In terms of they lose the job, in terms of not having the ability to care for their children, in terms of the health care costs that they have related to this crisis, we can make them whole now, and put in process a system whereby they all are made whole. That has nothing to do with the legitimate concern about income equality in America. That's real. That's real. But that does not affect the need for us to act swiftly and very thoroughly and in concert with all the forces that we need to bring to bear to deal with the crisis now. So no one's thrown out of their home. No one loses their mortgage. No one is kicked out of their house. No one loses their paycheck. No one is in a position where they have a significant financial disability as a consequence of this this particular crisis.
Thank you, Vice President. Senator Sanders.
Well, I think it goes without saying that as a nation, we have to respond as forcefully as we can to the current crisis. But it is not good enough not to be understanding how we got here and where we want to go into the future. So how does it happen that today, in the wealthiest country in the history of the world, half of our people are scared to death? Good. I agree. In fact, that was my idea originally, to make sure that every person in this country is made whole as a result of this crisis. But God willing, this crisis is going to end. And we are going to have to develop an economy in which half of our people are not living paycheck to paycheck and struggling to put food on the table.
I don't disagree with that. You were asking about the crisis. What are we going to do about the crisis now, which is incredibly consequential to millions and millions of Americans? And it's not going to be solved by a change in tax policy now. It's not going to be solved by a change in how we deal with health care. It's got to be solved with an emergency need right now. Right now. What do we do? First thing we do is we make sure that health care is available by us being having the tools to be able to deal with it, and that requires us to go out and do much more than this president has done in terms of planning. Secondly, it requires us to be in a position where we're anticipating what will happen in the next month or weeks in terms of the flow into the healthcare system by bringing the military along, more hospital beds, more training, more equipment to save the first responders as well. In addition to that, we then have to also look at what are the immediate needs right today. How about that person who's been laid off today? How about that person who doesn't have an income today? They have to know that tomorrow, when the paycheck comes due, you will get that paycheck. And thirdly, we have to think long-term about how we deal with making all those who have been badly damaged right again. And then we move on. Then we move on to change the economy in ways that are more profoundly necessary than people think, but do not respond to the immediate needs we have now. First things first.
Thank you, Vice President. Senator Sanders, you voted against bailouts following the 2008 financial crisis.
Yes.
Many believe those spending bills were a crucial part of stabilizing the economy back then. Would you support bailouts for industries that are being crushed by the coronavirus outbreak now?
I did. You're quite right. I voted against the bailout because I believe that the illegal behavior being done by the people on Wall Street should not be rewarded by a bailout. And today, by the way, those banks are more prosperous and own more assets, by and large, than they did back then. They're bigger now than they were then. I thought at the time that in the midst of massive income and wealth inequality, the people on top, through a surtax on the very wealthy, should bail out. And it's not just a top bailout. We gave trillions of dollars in zero-interest loans to large banks. But to answer your question, where we are right now, we need to stabilize the economy. But we can't repeat what we did in 2008. Joe voted for that. I voted against it. Because we have got to do more than save the banks or the oil companies. Our job right now is to tell every working person in this country, no matter what your income is, you are not going to suffer as a result of this crisis of which you had no control.
Vice President Biden.
Had those banks all gone under, all those people Bernie says he cares about would be in deep trouble. Deep, deep trouble. All those little folks. We'd have gone out of business. They'd find themselves in a position where they would lose everything that they had in that bank, whether it was $10 or $300 or a savings account. This was about saving an economy, and it did save the economy. And the banks paid back, and they paid back with interest. I agree with Bernie. Someone should have gone to jail. That was the big disagreement I had in terms of bailing out. But the question was, they paid back. In addition to that, it also, part of that was bailing out the automobile industry, saving thousands of jobs, tens of thousands of jobs over time. He voted against that as well.
No, I did not vote against that. That bailout money was used later on by Bush to protect the automobile industry. But here's the point. One minute. Here's the point here, is that in terms of that bailout, there are ways that you can bail out when you have a handful of people who have incredible wealth, who have prospered off of the illegal behavior of individuals, in this case on Wall Street. You know what you say to them? You want to, and I did. I said this to the Secretary of Treasury. You want to bail out? That's fine. You have your friends pay for it, not working people. The other point is, as Joe should know, it wasn't just the $700 billion PAR program. The Fed gave trillions and trillions of dollars in zero interest loans to every financial institution in this country and central banks all over the world. That was essentially a grant, because they then could sell that. They could then bring in interest rates much greater than the zero interest loans that they got.
Vice President Biden.
Look, the fact of the matter is that if, in fact, the banks had all been gone under, we would be in a Great Depression. We would have not. How do you get out of that? Now, Bernie's saying that I guess he's going to do a wealth tax or something, that the top 1% could pay for everything, and they should pay for everything that occurred. We were talking about tens and hundreds of billions of dollars. That's what this was about. And the fact was that it saved the economy from going into a depression. After we passed the Recovery Act, which I was the one who went out and got the 3 votes to get it changed, that had $900 billion in it, and was the thing that kept us from going into a Great Depression.
Vice President Biden, I'm going to stay with you. Many of the 11 million undocumented immigrants, and now even many legal immigrants in the United States, are afraid to seek medical help. How do you ensure they feel safe enough to get treatment to help stop the spread of coronavirus?
Anyone who shows up to be tested for coronavirus or gets coronavirus and is treated would be held harmless. Just like I've argued all along, any woman who crosses the border or is here and being beaten by her husband, but she's an undocumented, she cannot be deported because she reports. There are certain things you cannot deport an undocumented alien for, an undocumented person for, and that would be one of them. We want that. It's in the interest of everyone. And those folks who are the xenophobic folks out there, it's even in their interest that that woman come forward or that man come forward, because it deals with keeping the spread from moving more rapidly. They will not, should not, under any circumstances, be held accountable and be deported for that purpose, period.
Well, I have been criticized because the proposal for Medicare for All that I introduced includes making sure that undocumented people are also covered. And right now, we have the absurd situation where undocumented people who try to do the right thing, they're sick, they want to go to the doctor, they don't want to spread this disease, are now standing and thinking about whether ICE is going to deport them. So one of the things that we have to do is to make sure that everybody feels comfortable getting the health care that they need. That should be a general principle above and beyond the coronavirus. Second of all, we've got to end these terrible ICE raids, which are terrorizing communities all over this country. And thirdly, to answer your question, the time is long overdue for this country to move to comprehensive immigration reform and a path towards citizenship for those 11 million undocumented. And furthermore, on day one as president, I would restore the legal status of the 1.8 million.
Senator, thank you. We're going to talk about immigration in a minute, but first I want to ask about something that's going on right now. Again, back to this crisis. We know that people over the age of 60 And those with underlying medical conditions, especially heart disease, lung disease, and diabetes, are the most vulnerable to coronavirus and are being asked to change their behavior to protect themselves. So, Senator Sanders, I'll start with you. You're 78 years old. You had a heart attack. What are you doing to protect yourself?
Well, a great deal. Last night we had a fireside chat, not a rally. I love doing rallies, and we bring many thousands of people out to our rallies. I enjoy it very much. We're not doing that right now. In fact, our entire staff is working from home. So on a personal level, what we're doing is, I'm not shaking hands. Joe and I did not shake hands. And I am very careful about the people I am interacting with. I'm using a lot of soap and hand sanitizers to make sure that I do not get the infection. And I have to say, thank God right now I do not have any symptoms, and I feel very grateful for that.
Vice President Biden, you're 77. What are you doing to protect yourself?
Well, fortunately, I don't have any of the underlying conditions you talked about that I have to worry about, number one. Number two, thank God, for the time being, anything can happen, as my mother would say, knock on wood, that I'm in good health. Number three, I'm taking all the precautions anyone would take, whether they're 30 years old or 60 years old or 80 years old. And that is, I want to make sure that I do not shake hands any longer. I do not engage. We did the same thing. Our staff is all working from home. We are not doing rallies any longer. We're doing virtual rallies. We're doing virtual town hall meetings. We're in a situation where now I do not, as I said, when we encounter people, we're not going into crowds. And so I'm taking all the precautions everyone else should be taking. I wash my hands God knows how many times a day with hot water and soap. I carry with me, as a matter of fact, I have in my bag outside here, a hand sanitizer. I don't know how many times a day I use that. I make sure I don't touch my face, and so on. So I'm taking all the precautions we're told for everybody else to take.
Let's turn to the race more broadly now. Throughout this campaign, you've each laid out starkly different visions for how to bring about change. Vice President Biden, Senator Sanders is calling for a political revolution. You said people want results, not a revolution. Make the case for why a revolution is not what the country needs or wants.
We have problems we have to solve now. Now, what's a revolution going to do? Disrupt everything in the meantime? Look, the senator talks about his Medicare for all. He still hasn't told you how he's going to ever get it passed. He hasn't told you how, in fact, there's any possibility of that happening. He hadn't told you how much it's going to cost. He hadn't tell you how it's going to apply. It doesn't kick in for 4 years even after it passes. We want a revolution. Let's act now. Pass the Biden healthcare plan, which takes Obamacare, restores all the cuts made to it, subsidizes further, provides for lower drug prices, make sure that there's no hidden bills, make sure that we invest, I want to invest $50 billion in dealing with underlying diseases that are of great consequence, diabetes, Alzheimer's, and cancer. Make sure that we have a Medicare option that's in a public option providing Medicare for us. We can do that now. I can get that passed. I can get that done if I'm President of the United States of America. That will be a fundamental change, and it happens now. I can tell you from experience, being a significant consumer of healthcare, with my sons, my family, all the things we've gone through. What people want is hope, and they need it now, not 4 years from now. And Bernie still hasn't told us how he's going to pay for it. We're talking about a $30+ trillion plan.
Not quite true.
Senator,
right, look, let's do something that is very rarely done in the Congress. Let's do something that the media doesn't do. Let's talk about the reality of American life. Why is it that over the last 45 years, despite the huge increase in productivity and technology, the average worker today is not making a nickel more in real dollars? Why is it that over the last 30 years, the richest 1% have seen a $21 trillion increase in their wealth, bottom half of America, $900 billion decline in their wealth? Why is it that we are the only major country on earth not to guarantee health care to all people as a human right? Why are we the only major country not to have paid medical and family leave? Why do we give tax breaks to billionaires when 500,000 people are homeless today? And it comes down to something, Jake, we don't talk about. The power structure in America. Who has the power? And I'll tell you who has the power. It's the people who contribute money, the billionaires who contribute money to political campaigns, who control the legislative agenda. Those people have the power. And if you want to make real changes in this country, If you want to create an economy that works for all, not just a few. If you want to guarantee quality health care to all, not make $100 billion in profit for the healthcare industry, you know what you need? You need to take on Wall Street. You need to take on the drug companies and the insurance companies and the fossil fuel industry. You don't take campaign contributions from them. You take them on and create an economy that works for all.
You want to do that? Do what I proposed over 30 years ago. Federally fund all elections. No private contributions in the election process. If you want to do that, join me. Join me in my constitutional amendment that I've been proposing. Maybe you and I can work on that together, because that would fundamentally change it. And the implication is I've not accepted a contribution from anybody over $2,800, number one. My average contribution is $44. Just this month, I've raised $33 million, average contribution $51. The idea that this is, Bernie's implication is somehow I'm being funded by millionaires. Bernie, look, in the last Super Tuesday and before that, Bernie outspent me 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to 1. And I still won. I didn't have any money, and I still won.
Senator Sanders?
It's good that you had an idea 30 years ago. I don't want to join you. Why don't you join me? Why don't you get rid of the super PAC that you have right now, which is running very ugly negative ads by me. Don't laugh, Joe. That's just the truth. And they got 2 other super PACs running ads against us. Why don't you just say right now, go on television and say, hey, you know what? I think in the past, Joe, if I'm not mistaken, you condemned super PACs. Is that correct?
You get rid of the 9 super PACs you have?
I don't have 9 super. I don't have any super
9.
PACs.
You want me to list them?
No, yeah, you go ahead, list them.
Come on, give me a break.
No, I won't give you a break on this one, Joe. You condemned super PACs. You got a super PAC is running negative. But here's the point. This is the point. In the richest country in the history of the world, half of our people should not be struggling to put food on the table. And the reason for that is you have a political structure in which big money interests not only dominate the political system, but dominate our economy as well. Somebody makes a decision, we're going to shut down a factory in America, we're going to move to China, we're going to move to Mexico, pay people starvation wages there. This is an issue that has got to be ultimately dealt with. Who has the power in America? Are we content with so few exercising so much power when so many people have given up on the political process?
I proposed a significant change in the tax code, and I've been proposing it for a long, long time, number one. Number two, it's not just about taxing the super wealthy. It's about making sure everybody pays their fair share. For example, I can pay for my whole health care plan by changing the way in which we deal with capital gains. People should pay their capital gains based on what their income tax is, and not at 20%. That would raise $800 billion, pay for my entire medical health care plan, which would cover everyone. The fact of the matter is, everything I call for, I pay for. And I do not believe, and I have not supported these exorbitant tax cuts for the wealthy. I strongly oppose the tax cut that this president has put through of $1.9 trillion. And I said at the time, this is all about trying to eliminate the safety net. Look, the idea that Bernie implies the way he says things, speaking of negative ads, my Lord, Bernie, you're running ads saying I'm opposed to Social Security, that PolitiFact says is a flat lie, and that the Washington Post said is a flat lie.
Oh, well, let me ask you a question, Joe.
Yeah.
You're right here with me.
Yeah.
Have you been on the floor of the Senate? You were in the Senate for a few years.
Yeah.
Time and time again, talking about the necessity, with pride, about cutting Social Security, cutting Medicare, cutting veterans programs.
No.
You never said that.
No.
All right. America, go to the website right now. Go to the YouTube right now. Time after time, you were not a fan of Bo Simpson?
I was not a fan of Bo.
You were not a fan of the balanced budget amendment, which called for cuts in Social Security? Come on, Joe, you won't.
Look, here's the deal.
You're an honest guy. Why don't you just tell the truth here? We all make mistakes.
I am telling the truth. You said that I, in fact, why am I rated 96% by the Social Security Organization? Why am I viewed as a strong...
All that I said...
I have laid out how I will increase Social Security.
Well, that's good. I laid that out.
I have laid out how I'm going to make sure that it is, in fact, paid for.
Jake.
Go to joebiden.com. Look at my exchange with Paul Ryan on his desire to try to privatize and or cut Social Security.
Okay.
And understand how he manipulated it.
No, all right. Joe, let me repeat it again. I want you just to being straight with the American people. I am saying that you have been on the floor of the Senate time and time again talking about the need to cut Social Security, Medicare, and veterans programs. Is that true or is that
No,
not
it's
true?
not true.
That is not true?
That is not true. What is true is, in terms of the negotiations that were taking place, how to deal with the deficit, everything was on the table. I did not support any of those cuts in Social Security or in veterans.
Whoa. Everything was on the table. All right, you're right. You just said it, including, in your judgment, cuts to Social Security and veterans.
In order to get the kinds of changes we need on other things related.
Joe, then
But we did not cut it.
I know, because people like me helped stop that. But Joe, you just contradicted yourself. 1 minute, one minute you said I was not on the floor. The next minute you say, well, yes, there was a reason why I was worried about the deficit. Maybe that's good reason, maybe it's not. All that I am saying is you were prepared to cut and advocated for the cuts of programs.
I did not. I never voted to cut Social Security.
Not talking about voted, Joe. That's not what I said.
Well, look, I voted to protect it. Just go look at the debate with Paul Ryan for the vice presidency. Look at what I did. And Bernie, will you acknowledge your campaign took out of context that whole exchange between Paul Ryan? Are you saying PolitiFact is wrong? Are you saying?
Yeah, well, believe me, the Washington Post PolitiFact is wrong a whole lot of times.
But are they wrong on that, Bernie?
Okay.
Are they wrong on that, Bernie?
Joe.
Bernie, did you miss?
Joe, did you? Wait a minute. I'll answer your question. You answer mine.
I answered you.
No, you didn't.
All right.
One more time. Were you on the floor time to time, for whatever reason, talking about the need to cut Social Security and Medicare and veterans programs?
No, I did not talk about the need to cut any of those programs.
Okay, all that I would say to the American people, go to YouTube. It's all over the place. Joe said it many, many times. I'm surprised. You can defend that or change your mind on it, but you can't deny the reality.
So, Senator, because you brought up Social Security and you've been talking about it, I want to ask you about something that you wrote in 1996. You were a member of the House, and you wrote an op-ed that said, quote, "It is clear we will have to make incremental adjustments in Social Security taxes and benefits."
Yeah.
Why are your past comments any less relevant than
incremental adjustments? What I advocated, adjustments that I advocated and have advocated for years, is, among other things, increasing the cost of living assistance. No, you're not going to find me ever calling for cuts to Social Security. Right now, for example, we determine COLAs by looking at inflation for the general population rather than segregating the higher costs that seniors are paying for prescription drugs and for health care. That's what I was talking about. I have, in fact, when Joe and others were enamored with the so-called bold Citizen effort, which included cuts to Social Security or raising the retirement age, I formed, along with people like Barbara Boxer, the Defending Social Security Caucus to say no. When 20% of our seniors are trying to get by on $13,000 a year or more, we are not going to cut Social Security.
Vice President Biden, yesterday you endorsed an Elizabeth Warren plan that would undo key parts of the bankruptcy law you helped pass in 2005. A few hours ago, you announced support for making public college tuition free for families who make less than $125,000 a year, something Senator Sanders has supported. What changed?
Two things. Number one, let's talk about the bankruptcy bill. The bankruptcy bill was passing overwhelmingly, and I improved it. I had a choice. It was going to pass in a Republican president, Republican Congress, and I offered two amendments to make sure that people under $50,000 would not be affected, and women and children would go to the front of the line on alimony and support payments. That's what I did. It passed overwhelmingly. I did not like the rest of the bill, but I improved it, number one. Number two, I've talked with Senator Warren about her proposal. This is the first opportunity we've had to make substantial change in what we couldn't get done in a Republican administration. That's why we talked 2 nights ago, and I supported her proposal. And it's a good proposal. It's a solid proposal. And she should get credit for having introduced it. With regard to what we're talking about in terms of college education, I've been saying for a long time that we're in a position where 12 years of education is not enough for the 21st century. We need 16 years of education. The exact bill that Senator Sanders introduced, I guess a little over a year ago, capping it off at $125,000 in income. You could get free up to that point. After that, you'd have to pay for your college education. It only worked for public schools, and it would work for public universities in your state. I support that idea. It was a good idea, and I support it. And so that's what it is. And I'm not saying everything Bernie said has been wrong. He happens to be right on that one.
Senator Sanders, I assume you welcome these changes.
Look, this is a little bit about leadership as well. Joe talked about bankruptcy. Joe, my memory is correct. You helped write that bankruptcy bill.
I did not.
All right. And that bankruptcy bill, by the way, when we talk about education, you got 45 million people in America struggling with student debt. Some of them really struggling with student debt. And that bankruptcy bill made it impossible, very difficult for people to escape from that student debt. It was a very, very bad bill. You said, Joe, that a majority of the people in the Senate voted for it. You're right.
Overwhelmingly.
Overwhelmingly. Well, I voted against it in the House, and I was right. And I don't have to rethink my position, because that's what leadership is about, having the guts to take an unpopular vote. But it's not just bankruptcy. The difference between Joe and I on higher education is 4 years ago. It was not a popular idea, Joe. I'm glad you're coming around now. 4 years ago, when I said that public colleges and universities should be tuition-free, people were saying, Bernie, that's a radical idea. Well, you got states and cities and counties all over the country that are moving in that direction. And I'm glad that Joe is on board. But what leadership is about is going forward when it's not popular, when it's an idea that you get criticized for. So I'm proud of that fact, and I'm proud of my leadership on many issues. Joe, since the campaign has come around, I talked about raising that minimum wage $15 an hour 4 years ago, Joe.
So did I, and I went out and
$15 an hour?
$15 an hour, New York City. Go talk to the governor.
I will talk to the governor. I'm not aware of it.
All right.
I am not aware of it.
You should be aware. Look.
All right. 4 years ago, it was a radical idea. Very few people in Congress were talking about it.
Go ahead, Vice President.
Well, here, look. Let's get something straight about the bankruptcy bill. The bankruptcy bill already, it did not affect student debt for 90% because the law had already been passed. You could not declare bankruptcy for those loans that were from private institutions. You couldn't do it. And so the bankruptcy bill didn't affect that. It affected 10% of the people, the first bankruptcy bill. 10% of the student loans, number one. Number two, now we're in a position where we're able to correct that problem. The fact is, if I hadn't stepped up and changed the law as it relates to people making less than $50,000, those who, for alimony and child support, then guess what? They would have been in the bucket too. It was going to pass anyway. I made it, let me finish. I made it incrementally better. I did not like the bill. I did not support the bill. And I made it clear to the industry I didn't like the bill. Number two, this bill now calls for the opportunity to fundamentally change the mistakes we couldn't correct in the bill the first time around. And that is why I support Elizabeth Warren's idea. And it's a very good idea.
Senator Sanders, go ahead.
Well, this is kind of circular logic. We're going to reform the bill that I voted for. Well, if you hadn't voted for it, and if you had rallied other people, as I try to do in the House voting against it, we might not have the problems with it we have today. You know, what leadership is about, Joe, and it deals with, whether, your opposition or your support, I should say, for legislation regarding gay communities and the so-called Defense of Marriage Act. You remember that bill, right? You remember the Defense of Marriage Act. It was, gay marriage today is considered a little bit differently than it was 25 years ago. I remember that vote. It was a very hard vote. I voted against the Defense of Marriage Act. You voted for it. I voted against the bankruptcy bill. You voted for it. I voted against the war in Iraq, which was also a tough vote. You voted for it. I voted against disastrous trade agreements like NAFTA and PNTR with China, which cost this country over 4 million good-paying jobs. You voted for it. I voted against the Hyde Amendment, which denies low-income women the right to get an abortion. You have consistently voted for it. I don't know what your position is on it today, but you have consistently voted for it. In other words, all that I'm saying here, we can argue about the merits of the bill.
Vice President Biden.
It takes courage sometimes to vote, do the right thing.
We can argue about the past and the future. This man voted against the Brady bill 5 times. Background checks, 5 times. Number one. Number two, this man is the only one of the few Democrats I know who voted to exempt the gun industry from being able to be sued. Talk about a special interest. We can sue, we should be able to sue drug companies, we should be able to sue tobacco companies. We cannot sue the gun manufacturers because he voted for that years ago. He says it was a mistake now. I'm prepared to accept he says it's a mistake.
Well,
the question is, what do we do from this point on? And by the way, I might add, I'm the first person to go on national television in any administration and say I supported gay marriage. I supported gay marriage when asked. And it started a ripple effect. I'm not taking all credit for it, but I'm the first major player to say I support gay marriage on national television.
All that I'm saying here is
leadership.
We can argue, this or that bill. But what I'm suggesting is that in this time of crisis, when we're living in a really, really unsettling world, economically, from a healthcare perspective of the coronavirus, the people of America know my record, okay? For 30 years, I have stood with the working families of this country. I have taken on every special interest there is out there, and that is what I will do in the White House. That's a very different record than Joe's.
That is not a different record than mine.
That is a totally different record than yours, all right? I mean, and it's manifested in this campaign when you're, getting all this money from, wealthy people and billionaires. So I think if you want somebody who will take to the White House what I've done for my whole life.
Thank you, Senator Sanders.
And that is take on special interest. I think I'm that candidate.
Thank you,
Average
Senator
campaign
Sanders.
is $44.
Let's talk about the future, Vice President Biden. If you become the Democratic presidential nominee, how will you appeal to supporters of Senator Sanders when you do disagree on so many issues?
He's making it hard for me right now. I was trying to give him credit for some things. He won't even take the credit for things he wants to do. Look, I think that I want to make it clear. If Bernie's a nominee, I will not only support him, I will campaign for him. And I believe the people who support me will do the same thing. Because the existential threat to the United States of America is Donald Trump. It's critical. I would hope that Bernie would do the same thing if I'm the nominee and encourage all of his followers to, in fact, support me as well. Because it's much bigger than either of us. Character of the nation is on the ballot. It goes well beyond whether or not Senator Sanders and I both agree we need health care should be a right, not a privilege. We both agree we have to deal with student debt. We both agree we have to deal with education and access to education. We both agree that we have a new Green Deal to deal with the existential threat that faces humanity. We disagree on the detail of how we do it, but we don't disagree on the principle. We fundamentally disagree with this president on everything. This is a man who wants to cut Social Security, cut Medicare, not Bernie, the President of the United States. So this is much bigger than whether or not I'm the nominee or Bernie's the nominee. We must defeat Donald Trump. He is the exit. 4 more years of Donald Trump will fundamentally change the nature of who we are as a nation. We've got to restore this country's soul. That's essential. And as long as this president is there, we're not going to be able to do that.
Senator Sanders,
Can I just say a word, then I'll respond to you?
Well, it's just a quick question, which is, if he is the nominee, Vice President Biden, you've already said you would support him.
Of course.
But will you campaign for him? Will you urge your supporters to?
On day one, when I announced my candidacy, what I said is this country cannot deal with a president who is a pathological liar, who is running a corrupt administration, who obviously doesn't know the Constitution of the United States, who believes it's above the law, who is a racist and a sexist and a homophobe. He is the most dangerous president in the modern history of this country. And what I said on day one, that obviously I hope to win the nomination. But if I don't win the nomination, and I think every other Democratic candidate is prepared to come together to do everything humanly possible to defeat Donald Trump. But let me respond to something that Joe said. We talked about the Green New Deal and all of these things in general terms, but details make a difference. What I have said throughout this campaign, and I don't think I've heard you say this, Joe, is that if we are going to save this planet for our kids and future generations, we need to have the courage to take on the greed of the fossil fuel industry and make it clear to them that their short-term profits are not more important than the future of this planet. And we have a very detailed plan, a detailed proposal. Happy to get the endorsement of the Sunrise Movement, the young people.
We're going to get into the Green New Deal.
Okay.
We're going to talk about climate change. We have to squeeze in a quick break.